Welcome to the Startup Field Guide, where we learn from successful founders of high growth startups how their companies truly found product market fit. I'm your host, Sandhya Hegde, and today we will be diving into the story of Writer. Started in 2020, Writer is an enterprise grade Gen AI platform for larger security conscious companies. Writer has over 150 customers, including teams at companies like UnitedHealthcare, Uber, and Accenture. Last valued at over $500 million, Writer makes it really easy for these enterprises to build internal apps that generate a wide variety of content, from sales enablement to blog posts. Joining us today is May Habib, Writer's powerhouse co-founder and CEO. Welcome to the Field Guide, May.
Thank you so much, Cynthia. I've been such a fan of all of the incredible content you put out for founders, so I am thrilled to be here.
Oh, thank you. You are too kind. So, diving in, May, I am sure the origin of Writer all starts with Cordoba, your first startup, which I think you started all the way back in 2015, was also when I first met you. And so I'm really curious, what was the inspiration behind Cordoba at first? And how did it evolve into Writer 5 years later?
Yeah, great question. So, for me and Wasim, my co founder across my two entrepreneurial ventures, we really wanted to figure out a way to accelerate what was happening in localization and translation with Cordoba. And we used some pretty incredible machine learning during that time to build what was a localization platform, enterprise as well. So, a lot of things that we have learned, we've been able to carry through to Writer. And using encoder decoders in that business is really what led us to Writer. From a problem statement perspective, we kept seeing customers run into this content quality problem, regardless of what team they were on, from sales and support to marketing and documentation, around what people called like source content, i.e., English language content.
Right.
And so the idea was, hey, could we use these incredible transformers to actually work on source language? And it really did mean needing to build a completely different product and a completely different company. The go to market needed to be very different. And we started Writer in Q1 2020 to address and go after that opportunity.
And at this point, I think OpenAI had just released GPT-3, or maybe it hadn't quite happened yet. It was still a previous version. And they had already famously raised and spent millions of dollars on model training. What was your approach? Like, how were you contrasting what was happening with people using transformer technology to build startups at the time versus what you and Wasim wanted to do with Rust?
Yeah. Everything on kind of the editing and revision side of our generative technology, we had built in house. When GPT-3 came out, it was just such a step function advance in the quality of long form content generation, which we hadn't gotten to either from a quality perspective. And so there was a short period of time where we integrated that into our product and our stack, knowing what we were going to be trying to do, which is, build our own with the functionality that we needed to do what we wanted to do. And, for us, the GPT-3 didn't make a big difference in our go-to-market or our product strategy because the reception actually was basically the same. What really made a difference was ChatGPT reducing the risk of exploring and implementing this type of technology. And that really changed the game in enterprise. And luckily for us, by then we had made excellent progress on Palmyra, and we were able to use all of our own models for serving up all of our generative features and functionality. And from a security perspective, it lined up great with our posture.
Right. And what an amazing 18-month window that was between these two events. I'm curious, if you go back to the pre-ChatGPT era where your buyer's risk profile is very different, market awareness is very different, how would you articulate Writer's vision then? What was your product vision? How would you define the customer profile you were going after? And what were they looking for that was very different from trillions of parameters, large
Yeah.
models? Yeah. How
I
would you define like that early product vision?
I think we've got this unfair advantage of having had to sell generative AI before there was a word for it that makes it so that we don't talk product, we talk customer. We don't talk about tokens and parameters. We talk about like words and use cases and capabilities of the models. But it's a great question. That vision slide that you put at the beginning or at the end of your seed stage deck, for us, when we were raising, this was Q1 2020, it had the big inflection curve, and it was like AI writing assistant to AI writing. You cut out the assistant. And we actually put that in our decks too. Now, I definitely remember like it was probably like the editor in chief of Mayo Clinic or somebody where like it's like a kill that slide, they're not going to want to see that slide. And
Right,
so
right.
those early months was a lot of what is this? What is it based on? Wait, how did you do that? Um, and the positioning was AI writing assistant. Now, of course, Grammarly is the comp, right? And so even as we were able to do more generative stuff, the go to market was just much more natural to go in on content quality and within like technical documentation teams where we could do a lot more than what Grammarly was able to do, just be a lot more prescriptive, a lot more customization. Now, with those folks, those are actually the last folks that want to be like creative and generating ideas, but because they know what they want to say. They just got to say it much more clearly and concisely and have it land. And we were able to do all of those things. In the like content copy and ideation side, Phrasey was in that space, is still in that space, wonderful company. Persado is. I had coffee with Alex this morning. Also excellent company and strong product market fit. And for us, it was just a lot less interesting given where we thought generative was going for us to look backwards in a way. It wasn't, this is a big space. We weren't that interested in running A/B variations and
Right.
like simulating personality and like trying to actually own a conversion number as a product. There's just a
Right.
lot of complexity. And we love being close to the end user. And I think localization and translation gave us that. As God, mind numbing as it was sometimes, translators are very specific people. There's something really beautiful to the hardship of needing to serve very picky end users who are deep into the craft versus admins buying tools for people. And or like someone who is okay with a black box of just make it do this and not really hands-on into your interfaces. We stayed in that space. Now, we were multi-use case and multi-function from the beginning, like functional area. And so because and Grammarly was doing this as well. I think, it was they were doing it a lot more in support. And because we had just much deeper customization capabilities, because we were using generative and not AI 1.0, only NLP techniques and rules-based stuff, we were able to address marketing use cases and L&D use cases and support use cases, et cetera. So the playbook kind of 2020, 2021, even when we raised our A, was land in marketing and then let the product go across the business. When we did our A, we were probably like 60, 70% of the lands were in marketing, but then like about half were using us marketing plus 1, 2, 3 different areas. Both those numbers now are much, much higher. So like most customers using us in 3 or 4 different teams, But the Series A kind of like vision statement was writing is the last unoptimized business process.
Hmm.
And can we approach writing in just a much more like methodical, programmatic way? And again, not having words for generative, right?
Right.
That's how we explained it is like really being able to push a button and have a few parameters and get what you need to do the thing.
Like you, bio, you care about business process optimization. So how do we help you understand the opportunity or in
Yes.
your language, right? I think,
Yeah.
yeah, the challenge of being too early to the spaces, you don't get to kind of align with the tailwind when everyone is, okay, this is the thing, I will stop questioning it. which is fascinating. So I'm curious. I think a lot has changed about your buyer, right? Maybe actually more has changed about your buyer than your product vision as a company over the last three
Yes.
years. So I'm curious, like, how would one thing I think you talked about is this horizontal strategy and the buyer's view of that has probably changed. I'm also curious how the buyer's view of security has changed. Or has that, or you have always focused on enterprise? What did they ask you about? Or were they more educated about, oh, are you going to use my data to train your models? Is that a question you ever got before
Yeah.
ChatGPT? I'm
We
curious
could
how the buyer questions have evolved.
It's such a good one. We could probably spend 3 hours just on this question because I don't know that any other space has had as much like buyer transformation. We were selling to directors of content marketing, directors of product content, directors of
Mm,
content design, people who like really needed the words to be very specific, do
right.
very specific things. They needed to build just a much more programmatic, systematic way. Systematic, I think, is the word. Systematic systems of language is the right. Whoever owned the system of language at a company was our buyer. Fast forward 18 months, you've got boardrooms. Like I've spoken to at 25 executive board meetings, right? And the end, it's nuts. Like just in the last quarter, this is a board level priority. And, the kinds of questions now that we get are folks thinking out loud with us, a COO of a Fortune 100 bank being like, okay, and, they've got like a part of their business where they sell to other banks. Can I take a 2-week onboarding process and make it a 2-day onboarding process? And we're like, we're going to workshop the shit out of it. But yeah, I think so. And people are thinking so broad and so deep because they're understanding and the technology, of course, has made huge amounts of progress. Absolutely. The envelope has been pushed by OpenAI and they it's great because they forced all of us to catch up. I think the beauty of the 18 months of progress is we definitely have buyers, especially executives, who are like, wow, human beings are no longer a constraint to my growth. They are no longer a constraint to my business model innovation. What can I do? And even when what they want to do may not be possible, it's just pulling everybody into this very open mindset. And so many of our customers, people who, and I would put Accenture and UnitedHealthcare and Intuit in those categories, the champions that like bought Writer in 2020 and rolled it out to 3, 4 teams and like all the new stuff that we rolled out, they like leaned in. They're heroes. And they have gotten to be in charge of a lot more stuff.
Right.
And so that is so exciting. So the buyer now encompasses a much broader set of personalities, much higher up in the organization. Our actual buyer, the first like few mil in sales, much more empowered. And so we've got a much closer relationship with them, which just drives the roadmap and drives everything else that you're able to build. It's really remarkable. I remember when we took this is 14 months ago now, when we took the first web pages live where we talked about Palmyra and our generative AI functionality, et cetera, in real depth. And the team was like, there's no way we're going to put LLM in the subhead May. The fuck? Come on. You're writing it out. I'm like,
Right.
guys, seriously, I really think this is going to be fine. And now we walk in and people want to understand that fusion and decoder paper that your team wrote. So instead of RAG or in addition to RAG, like these are non-technical people. It's awesome. And people are discovering, right, that like a proof of concept is possible. Generative AI at scale is hard and expensive. And we have definitely learned a lot, and the platform is the leading generative AI platform. I think we've packaged things together in ways that make a lot of sense for people who want to do generative AI at scale.
Right. And
But there's no way we could have done that if the buyer had not evolved at the speed that they have. It'd be 2020 all over again, right? People being like, wait,
right.
what is this?
I won't be able to convince my leadership team to lean into this as opposed
Yeah,
to my leadership team is demanding that I deploy this faster,
right.
right? Very big
Exactly.
difference. So
Yes.
you brought up a really good point, which is a huge difference between like prototype and at scale and production. How much does the security and compliance requirements play into that? And at what point did that become the important investment in your roadmap? Was that kind of always a baseline requirement to work in the enterprise, or was that something that like you as a company have evolved your vision around as well?
Yeah, this goes back to us moving from Cordoba to Ryder and really starting a brand new company. Like what we did end of 2019, early 20 as the pillars of our product strategy, the enterprise first enterprise readiness data security was a big part of it. We won a lot of RFPs and bake-offs against Grammarly because we analyzed data transiently and we didn't save down any data that we saw in a browser. We're in there for a millisecond, like putting in the edit or the generation and then getting out. And the data was not retained. It was like in a segregated environment that was all auditable. Like all the Chrome extension code was transparent. Like you literally, if you're an enterprise customer, you could have completely rebuilt. We gave you so much transparency. You could have rebuilt a bunch of the stuff. And so we took that into everything that we did. We spent 18 months curating and cleaning the data that went into Palmera. And it's top of the performance charts. And a big part of that is just the investment that we made. There isn't proprietary customer data in our foundation model training data. We didn't do secret deals and buy a bunch of stuff. Like it's what everybody else has access to and actually much more refined for copyright and other stuff. So the data awareness, the enterprise approach, all of that has been baked in. We've been SOC 2 Type 2 since 2020. So we've literally like we're in our third audit cycle. So this is a big part of our culture and what we do. In building our own models, we have 17 models. A number of them are on Hugging Face. And in just our approach to how we treat all the content that folks give us for RAG, for building digital assistants, for fine tuning, for index building. All of that is treated with exceptional kind of consideration to privacy. The deployment options that we provide, multi-cloud, single tenant, and customer managed as well. All of that has been in the DNA from day one.
Makes sense. I'm curious about maybe a year ago, once ChatGPT took off, the idea of hallucinations and the risk of hallucination, especially when you have a conversational chatbot use case, became front and center for a lot of risk averse buyers. And you're definitely working with kind of knowledge oriented companies, right? Whether it's Accenture or others that really care about accuracy. How did a writer approach the hallucination problem? And is it a problem for your customers? How do you think about it?
Yeah. So Writer is a generative AI platform. So we've got
Right.
the LLM with a knowledge graph set of functionality, right? What other folks call RAG, and it's RAG plus and AI guardrails together. It's composable. Most people are using all three parts to get the generations and the answers at the quality, the scale, the cost, the inference that they need for production grade. And hallucinations, whether the use case is a assistant and a chat interface, or it is an editor input output style, hallucinations have a lot to do with what we're actually trying to do, what the use case is, like the approach to limit hallucinations. In the kind of knowledge augmented, retrieval augmented generation RAG use cases where you're drawing on companies' own data, ontologies become exceptionally important. And so for us, use case is almost a proxy for what ontology do you call. So it can be this similar set of data that is actually processed and reviewed and analyzed in different ways depending on what the use case is. We've been in pretty exceptional circumstances where folks who've only gotten to 50, 60% accuracy with a Copilot or with Azure AI, et cetera, get to 90% plus with us as a result of our kind of multifaceted approach. And at a high level, what I can tell you is we're not trying to boil the ocean. We narrow in and then apply the techniques that are going to get folks the right answer. We provide the sources so people can trace it back. You've got all of the considerations there. But you got to be able to do it at scale because there might be some use cases where the timestamp, for example, you actually want to be like to privilege like the last added, right? And there are other use cases where it's actually give me the oldest one. That's actually the one that's most trustworthy. And so the hallucination control has everything to do with that multi-pronged approach. Use case, right ontology, using RAG very effectively. We actually don't use vector databases for most of these use cases because they're expensive, they're hard to update, and just the scaling of high accuracy is just, we just haven't seen those results relative to our knowledge graph approaches. In the generation side of the use cases, actually, it's a really similar approach of tracing back the sources, but you're not tracing back the source of an answer. You're actually doing it claim by claim. And that claim could be a fact, it could be a statistic, it could be a quote. And so there's a mode where we actually give the end user sort of the overlay where they can look at where something came from. And the research side of the house is tracing back, like even down to the weights. There are going to be techniques that we bring to market that allow us to go even deeper than what data did we get from your knowledge graph that has fed these generations or these answers. So it's multi-pronged. The user absolutely has to be in the loop. And for kind of high volume use cases in retail, for example, where you're inventing a new workflow and it's at a volume where actually, other than random spot testing and like A/B analysis and just like looking at the data, there's no way to tell if there are hallucinations in there, then it's other approaches, right? It's fine tuning, it's turning down the temperature, it's all the other stuff.
Makes sense. I'm curious. I know the last 12 months have been incredible at Writer. So, congratulations for
Thank you so
that,
much.
first of all. But before that, were there moments where you did something that really wasn't working, or like it was a great prototype, but like you were having trouble figuring out like the buyer, the kind of retention? I'm curious whether there were moments where you were able to clearly identify like a pain point you hadn't thought of, and how you responded to that in terms of like your product strategy, your company strategy, any kind of unlocks or surprises along the way that you were able to learn from.
Yeah, yeah, definitely. There was definitely a time, you know, 14 to 16 months ago for 2 or 3 months where we stuck to our guns on enterprise, but definitely privately had some doubts, right? Like
Right.
tons of people making a shit ton of money in kind of prosumer,
Right.
and it makes not a lot of sense, but is that something we should be investing in? And till today, our funnel is 95% inbound. People come to us, but it's product led sales versus product
Right.
led growth. People aren't
Right.
putting in a credit card, not for the majority of our ARR. The self service ARR is a meaningful business on its own, but it's not what we're focused on and doing at all. It wasn't necessarily like just so obvious every month since the Series A. That's what
Right.
we should be doing.
Yeah, no, I think that's such a important question, right? Because you have your conviction around like what makes Writer uniquely awesome for enterprise. But then there are all these other companies with millions of people like swiping credit cards, checking it out. How did you think about your own decision framework for it? What was your internal argument for not completely investing in a self-serve prosumer play?
Yeah. I think I'm I'm so biased around how hard it is to do both things at once.
Right.
And from my experience, Cordoba to writer, just really understanding that like to truly succeed, you gotta burn the fucking boats. And we just weren't gonna burn the enterprise boats.
Right.
These are our favorite people in the world, like these users and these champions. And so then, is grass always greener? I think we prayed on. Can't speak for Wasim, but I definitely prayed on that. God,
Right.
please make sure we were making the right decision here, because I do think you got to commit one or the other, especially at these early stages.
Makes sense. Yeah, no, I think a lot of things that you guys do really well, especially on the security compliance side, is stuff the prosumer market does not care about
Right.
and is not going to value you for, will not consider you differentiated for.
Exactly.
So, yeah, no, I think your conviction has definitely proven to be an asset. What do you see as the next big horizon for both generative AI as a technology, but more importantly for writer?
Yeah. I love what we're doing over the next couple quarters to help bring generative AI to the mainstream. To really, there's going to be a lot of stuff coming out that I'm very excited about that takes everything that we have learned and we've learned with our customers and makes it much faster, even faster time to value for folks who don't have the same sets of resources or time or engineering capabilities to do a lot of what the early adopters can do. So I'm really excited about that and the next quarter and two. And then back half of next year, being able to really incorporate what other folks call agents, we call workflows,
Hmm.
but the ability to really take LLMs from helping orchestrate tasks to helping orchestrate work. So it's going to be really fun.
Yeah, no, I can't wait for it. I think the accessibility problem is like probably the biggest differentiator between enterprise and consumer for me because even as a consumer of these tools myself, I'm happy to do trial and error over a weekend, figuring out how to make something cute. But if I'm
Yeah,
at work, I want it to be fast and reliable. I don't want to do any trial and error, right?
right.
So that's how I think about accessibility. It's not that like you are catering to an audience that understands it less. It's just that their decision criteria for what software is reliable and easy to use is very different depending on what mode they are working in. Are you thinking about going multimodal, and what does that mean for your customer?
Yeah. Multimodal for us is going to be for our customer first and not prosumer or consumer. So,
Right, right.
yes, imagery will come, but it is going to be in the context of what folks need to know and need to do in the use cases they're using Writer for. So, we already parse video, audio, can read charts, read images. In creating charts, we'll probably do that first. Creating images, it really has to make sense because in an enterprise and in a security environment, high security environment, I don't want to be in like the generic blog post banner making
Right,
business. Like you can
right,
get that for free anywhere. It's narrowing in on the use cases that we're going to
right.
be able to uniquely do. We work backwards from a world where, like, just from a product strategy perspective, where excellent generative AI is built into every system of record. We're nowhere close to that, but like we work backwards from that assumption, and consumer grade frontier model access to multimodal functionality is free. And so, what do you build in that world? Nobody who is going to build a big business can't be thinking about those two realities.
Maybe that's a good segue into kind of thinking about your journey as a CEO. What everyone who knows you well tells me is you are really exceptional at understanding what is something that you need to learn and who you want to learn it from, which I think is probably just as important as making the decision, okay, I want like input on this idea or this problem. I'm curious, how have you thought of yourself as like a CEO in terms of what were your strengths when you started and what were things that you have grown and invested in over all these years, and your advice for other founders who are getting started on the same journey?
I think similar to what we search for in our hires, this kind of sense of curiosity because you're just curious in and of yourself. It has nothing to do with anything extrinsically motivating to most people. You're just curious. I do think so much of where we are today is because me and Wasim just asked pretty busy people in the enterprise about their life and their day and their jobs. And really deeply, I think the competitive advantage of our early team, the product team and the early CS team, is we know more about content and knowledge workflows across a company than literally any team. And I think that's reflected in how we build product. That probably, and it may be cliche, like just not giving up, like having like such outsized belief that we will find the answer no matter how long it takes. That's definitely been something that has served us well. So it's been like the curiosity to work on something interesting and impactful, and then scaling that for like real massive at scale kind of contribution to the world. And I think there's part of our culture that really believes in folks with a very steep learning curve, just keep them on that curve and keep putting new challenges in front of them, and they will find the answers. And at the same time, benefiting from the lived experience. We are definitely a culture of no prior playbooks. This is a completely, it's so much of this space is a rip of every base time continuum fabric that has come to define B2B SaaS for the last while. And we want people who can think from first principles.
Awesome. Thank you so much for joining us today, May.
Hey,
This was
Sandhya, thank you so
amazing,
much.
and
Great
I
conversation.
can't wait to see where you take right.
Thank you
And
so much.
so helpful, all the learnings you've shared. Thank you so much for joining us on Field Guide.
Appreciate you. Thank you.
You've been listening to the Startup Field Guide with Sandhya, an Unusual Ventures podcast. Stay connected with us by subscribing to the show in your favorite podcast player. If you liked what you heard, please rate our show and help us reach more aspiring founders with lessons on how to find product market fit. Thanks for listening. Until next time.